like to call this build the Immortal turret. Basically, this is a build for lazy people. Not that the build is lazy, but sometimes it lacks the mobility of that rogues have. But sometimes me personally as a player, I just want to sit down, enjoy my game and watch things explode, watch things go boom. And this is what this build is going to do. It's very tanky, it's never going to die, because it's going to heal while making things go boom. And you're basically going to be a turret that is just going to be standing in one single place, and that is going to make everything die around you, everything explode around you. That is the main core of this build. That is what is going to make this build amazing. And what I like about this build is that it will have some things that are going to natively be inherent part of the endgame build, but if you want to level up with this build, you're also able to level up with this build. So let's talk about the skill first. I'm not going to dwell too much in this place because I do not want to waste your time, and also we are not using, you will notice that we are not using every single stat, every single skill point right here, because that will give you room to breathe and to place points into something that you would like to do. But let's begin with puncture. Puncture is going to make enemies vulnerable with fundamental puncture whenever we are not making enemies vulnerable with the rest of the tools that we have to make enemies vulnerable, but most of the cases the enemies are going to be vulnerable. Then we're going to be maxing out rapid fire because that is what it's going to make us a turret. Rapid fire, remember, is self-sustainable, and every time that we are damaging vulnerable enemies we are going to be getting our energy back, so that is why we are a turret, because we're not going to have to waste any energy. That is what I like about this build. You're never going to have to be doing anything rather than to be pressing this button. We do have some little extra tools, but they are not necessary. Usually people is going to die by using this little thing right here. This is what is going to make us be undying turret, as well as some certain specific aspects that we are going to have later on. But this thing is going to heal us when we critical hit. That is why you want to be focusing on critical hit chance as much as possible. But yeah, this thing, as long as you're standing in front of the enemy, we are just going to be standing in some place. We plant ourselves right in that, we use this thing, we abuse this thing, and that is what is going to make everything explode around you, while at the same time you heal. Specifically, this is going to be true when you're fighting against bosses, when you're fighting against the Butcher, when you're fighting against world bosses. You want to be under enemy's face for you to be healing as long as you're dealing damage. And then this is Shadow Step. Shadow Step is just going to do one little single thing for us. And the only downside of this build, the only real downside of this build is that every time that you're not dealing damage, when you are not dealing damage, you are going to die because you're a tank. You are a tank, you're healing while you're dealing damage. As soon as you stop dealing damage, you're most likely going to die. So this guy is going to allow you to get out of that CC real fast, and you're never going to get stunned thanks to the Shadow Step. Also, we have Disciplined Shadow Step, which is going to reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds so long as we use Shadow Step on an enemy that we haven't used Shadow Step previously. So this guy is what is going to save you out of those tricky situations where you're not dealing damage anymore and you get killed because you're not dealing damage anymore. Then we're going to have Concealment. Concealment is going to be on a synergy with Poison Trap. Basically, what you're going to be doing is that you're going to be making a kill zone. That kill zone is going to be part of your inherent playstyle. That is because when you start shooting, you're most likely going to start shooting from a distance, then the enemy is going to close the gap between you, and you're going to have the Subverting Concealment, which basically, the skill that breaks Concealment, it's going to make enemies vulnerable for 6 seconds. The thing is that if you break Concealment with Poison Trap, the poison damage that you have right there is going to be making enemies vulnerable regardless of when they enter the damage. So you place that kill zone and basically you are always going to be attacking vulnerable enemies, where you're going to be benefiting from the vulnerability that Rapid Fire has. But then again, Rapid Fire is a self-sustainable skill that is going to be focused on dealing laser damage in single target enemies. That is why we are going to focusing the rest of our points into Shadow Imbuement as much as we can, and we're also going to be tweaking our Paragon to improve this little thing as much as possible. And if you see things exploding around me on the gameplay footage that I have for you in the background, is because Shadow Imbuement, one of the most important things about our build, is making things explode around you. and that is why I love so much about Shadow Imbuement. We're going to max out everything about Shadow Imbuement, and also Shadow Imbuement is going to be making enemies vulnerable for us so that we can keep spamming our rapid fire as much as possible. Finally, you are going to have Victimize, which is going to heal. It's going to work in a synergy, it's going to deal damage, it's going to make enemies vulnerable, and it's also going to work in a synergy for healing with a legendary aspect that we're going to be having later on. That said, we do have, like I said, remaining 12 points that you can place in the rest of your passives. The passives that I would recommend for you to have as a must, it's Mending Obscurity, which is going to heal you sometimes if you find that in that tricky situation. This could also get you away from CC because it's also going to make you unstoppable. You cannot be stunned while you have this thing, and you're also going to be healing thanks to that. You have the healing right here, and you have the damage from Weapon Mastery. The rest of the stuff you can play around with. You can place the rest of your passives into wherever you would like to place the rest of the passives, but this is going to be the base skeleton of the build. Before we continue though, a little word from today's sponsor. I have to work, you have to work, we have to work full-time shifts. You have family, you have kids, you have friends, you have social. We don't really have time for grindy games like Diablo anymore, not as much as we would like, but we actually do want to play the endgame, the high-level characters and whatnot. So DVNG, it's going to be a place where you're going to be able to purchase this kind of services where they're going to power level up your characters, or maybe you want to have a new account for them to level it up on your behalf while you're doing other stuff. And they have all kind of games like Diablo, Destiny 2, Division, World of Warcraft, Outriders and whatnot, and there's always going to be someone very kind in here to answer all of your questions in case you have any questions. So let's go over Diablo and then go to Diablo builds. We're going to go to Veteran. It's going to tell you here everything that it is going to be unlocked, like the Altars of Lilith, gold, levels, the legendary aspects, the build that is going to have, and it's also going to give you the amount of time that it is going to take for them to deliver this thing to you. You can also use my promotional code RPJames to get a 15% discount in every single purchase that you make with these guys. Let's continue with the video. And then we have the equipment. One very important aspect, one very important thing about this build is going to be Temerity. But if you're not, basically if you're able to get Temerity, you're going to be Immortal. You're going to be healing yourself at all times, and you're always going to be a 45, meaning you're going to be basically Immortal. Nothing is going to be able to kill you. You're always going to have twice as much as health as you're supposed to have, and you're always going to be regaining that health back because you're always healing thanks to a bunch of stuff that we have right here. But if you do not have Temerity, trust me, it's still going to be the very same tanky build. It's just that it is still going to be tanky, it's just that Temerity is basically going to make you Immortal. Now I would say that the most important offensive aspect that you're always going to have, and my advice is for you to use crossbows with this build, because crossbows gives you 60% native, at least when you manage to cross the final breakpoint. It is still going to be giving you vulnerable damage. We are going to be leveraging vulnerable as much as possible, as you were able to see, so we want to be making enemies vulnerable as much as possible. For the accelerating aspect, what this thing is going to do, if you place it on your main weapon, it's going to double your DPS when it comes to your main weapon, because it's going to make you attack like a maniac. And actually, this is something that I do not like about this build. It's a little bit bugged. It's still not going to affect the overall effectiveness of the build, but the thing is that you're going to attack so fast with rapid fire and this thing that sometimes your hits will not register. The game will completely omit them. That has something to do with the lag and the input and whatnot, but still it is just going to be lasering bosses, as you are able to see right here. Now Edgemaster is very important because we are always going to have that native 20% extra damage, because we're always going to have our energy at a maximum. Also, we are going to be using Inner Sight because we're not using our basic attacks. The only time where you're going to be using your basic attack is that when you run out of ways of making your enemies vulnerable and you have to use Puncture, but it's just going to be just one Puncture. So we're not going to be using combo points, we're not going to be using ultimates. And then again, we already have our energy at a maximum, but a little bit extra something to have the extra 20% of the Edgemaster. It is something nice, but then again, you're always going to have the Edgemaster aspect at the maximum capacity because you're always regaining your energy back. The other one that you're going to be using is going to be the aspect of the Inner Calm. Like I said, you are going to be a turret. Basically, you're going to plant yourself in one place, you're going to to be using your kill zone, which is going to be the combination between concealment and poison trap, and then you're going to start shooting. When you start shooting, things are going to start exploding around you. You're never going to be killed because you're always going to be healing, thanks also to the aspect of the cool sustenance, because every time you have triggers from the victimize stat skill that we have, we are going to be healing ourselves. So as you can see, we have a whole lot of different sources of healing, and we're always going to be just being in there, exploding things, healing ourselves. And oh boy, it is just amazing. Another thing that I really like that much, it's the Umbrous aspect. The critical strikes give you the chance to cast a Dark Shroud. If you're able to get Dark Shroud on your helmet, that is most ideal, because you're always going to be dealing critical damage because of rapid fire. You're going to be attacking so fast that you're always going to have Dark Shrouds, which is going to basically give you more tankiness because you're already healing and you also have your Dark Shrouds that are flying around you. Ghostwalker aspect, that is just a little bit of an extra protection. Like I said, the only real downside about this build is when you get CC'd, because if you stop dealing damage, you are not going to have your Dark Shrouds, you are not going to have the victimized heal potential, you're not going to have the critical strike healing. So basically, if someone CCs you, you're dead with this build because you're not moving around, you're just standing in one place. That is why we're using Concealment to get out of that CC, we're using Shadow Step to get out of that CC, we're using Ghostwalker aspect to get out of that CC. So basically, we are just going to be getting out of that CC situation as much as possible. We have so much sustainability in here not to be able to get killed anywhere, anytime. And finally, we are going to have the aspect of Disobedience, which then again, when we deal damage, any source of damage, it's going to increase our armor that much. If we place it on the talisman, it's going to give us a total of 75% armor, which is... it's gorgeous, beautiful, and I love it. Our Paragon board, finally. This is very important, and this is very interesting. As you can see right here, we are not actually taking advantage of the legendary notes. Rather, we are going to be taking advantage. You can play at your discretion in here, but just be aware that you are going to be taking this specific glyphs and you want to be taking as much damage as possible. What kind of damage are we going to be taking? We're going to be taking our non-physical damage. The non-physical damage is going to increase the damage of your explosions and the vulnerability damage that the shadow bombs, shadow attacks are going to deal. You are going to increase the critical strike damage because then again you're going to be dealing that much damage with your score skills, which basically also a main thing that you are going to be having is your maximum skills deal that much more damage, your vulnerable deal that more damage, and your physical damage. So basically we're going to have Kenny, Combat, Exploit, Ranger, and Chip. Those are the glyphs that we are going to be using. You should max them out as soon as possible. But also the most important glyph that you are going to have, and this is just going to break this build up to the heavens, it's going to be Exploit. Because Exploit, anytime, by any means, any kind of damage that you do to an enemy, doesn't really matter what kind of damage, is going to make them vulnerable for 3 seconds. Enemies are not going to last 3 seconds against you, against your hits, against the damage that you're dealing. So basically, as soon as you touch them, they are going to be vulnerable, and if they do not die, they're most likely going to be dying of your explosions, of your victimized. There's just so much stuff that is going to be happening around you, that everything is just going to be exploding, vulnerable, damage. That is why you have your energy at all times, and that is what I love about this build, is that it's like I said, it's a really lazy build. Not on the thought, I really did plan this build quite carefully, but what I like about this is I not really have to worry about being moving on the battlefield, but most importantly, I'd not have to be worried about moving my energy, about doing specific stuff that is going to give me my energy back, and to be managing the energy. In here, just by using rapid fire, you're always going to have infinite amount of energy because of this. Now, gameplay loop and final recommendations. Like I said, see, if you have everything set up as I have it right here, you are going to be dealing vulnerable damage just by touching the enemies. That's when they are going to start dying. They are going to immediately die because of that, meaning you're always going to have your energy back. But you also want to be casting your kill zone in that time where you're in the face of the enemy. Remember to be healing properly. You want to be on the face of the enemy. You want to attack from a distance. As soon as you see something, you want to kill him from a distance. But whenever you do have to close the gap, you're going to cast concealment. You're going to cast poison trap. That is going to generate that kill zone that is going to be making enemies vulnerable. Again, they're going to be poisoned. They're going to be dying. And that is what is going to happen. Sometimes in the eventful event that happens, which is something that is not going to happen that likely that often, you are going to be using puncture for specific enemies that are no longer vulnerable. You should never ever with this build be attacking enemies that are not vulnerable. And then finally we are going to be using shadow step to get away from the CC situations. And then again, since we are always going to be attacking enemies that are like not the very same enemies, it's going to have a 7 seconds cooldown, which is amazing. We're also going to have our Ghost Walker aspect. We're not going to have our concealment available that much all times, but between Ghost Walker and Shadow Step, that is just going to be more than enough for you to never die with this build. If you like the content, select the recipe, appreciate it. And also, today you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. I will see you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel before you close the door. Have a beautiful day and goodbye.